Israel. It's got to be beautiful. That's great. Okay. Thank you, Wayne. All right. Fantastic.
Except I won't tell you that I'm here now.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Well, you're still a
But
voice. You're still a voice from Israel.
I know, and I brought some of Eretz HaKodesh with me.
What did you bring? What did you bring?
The Kedusha.
Oh, okay. All right. But you brought that for your grandkids, I take, huh?
Yeah, I brought it for anyone who wants it.
All right. I'm sure your kids are grateful that you can babysit with the kids in this early hour. All right.
Sure.
So we had just started on Friday the laws of Dine Nizke Mamon. And as you'll see, following the pattern of the Shulchan Aruch in this particular area, which the Rav Shulchan Aruch is following, he's going to really be discussing in causative damages that are a result of squealing or informing on a fellow Jew to the authorities. And that's the type of damage that we're going to be focusing on. So we're actually going to condense some of the other principles of damages just in the first couple of sentences. And that's why there's a lot of commentary in the Imrei Yaakov over here to sort of help us unpack it. And what we were saying is that the first thing that we saw in Sifkat and Bays over here, where my cursor is that in most situations, a person cannot claim that it was an accident and therefore I'm exempt from damage, because you're liable for damages even if the damage was completely unintentional. The only time that we say that a person will be off the hook for damages is if it was completely unavoidable, because he was not a party to any kind of contributory negligence or should have, would have, etc. And the example that we give is that if a person is sleeping and he rolls over on a utensil and breaks it, then he's liable, except if where he was sleeping, there was no utensil when he went to bed, and someone went ahead and put the utensil there, and then he rolls over on it. Then he's called a complete onus, and he's going to be exempt in that kind of situation. That doesn't really help us, in all to extrapolate that to all examples, but at least it gives us some level of guideline. Now, he says as follows. He says, and then he also pointed out that even if you're saving your life and you, in the course of saving your life, you damage property, since you know about what you're doing, you're going to be liable for that damage, even though you were completely justified in damaging someone's property. So let's say, you're in the middle of an action movie and you've got to do a daring jump in order to escape the mobsters, and you've got to crash through a window, right? So you can crash through the window. It's perfectly okay for you to save your life by crashing through the window, but at the same time, you're going to have to pay for the replacement of the window after your life has been saved. Okay, now we're up to over here. He says, I want you to know that the poskim disagree regarding some of the parameters of what makes you into a mazik, a damager. The das harambam, the chiyuv tashlum hanezek nemer dafka im hiziko birishus hanezek. According to the Rambam, you're only going to be liable for damages if you cause the damage on the property of the victim. Avol birishus hamazik. But let's say I caused the damage on my property. A guy brings over a widget over to my house, and I step on it and I damage it, but it's in my house. So that will make a difference. O birishus harabim. Or let's say I damage that property in a public thoroughfare, sheyesh l'shneihem rishus leilech, where both of us have rights of passage. So in that situation, the Rambam says that the mazik is going to be pater. Or let's say it's a place where neither of us, neither you nor I, the victim, have the right to trespass in that area. and I go ahead, let's say both of us are trespassing on a private property, and I go ahead and I step on your object, or I damage your object. So Eino Chayiv L'Shalem Ela Im Hizik B'Zadon. So then you're not going to be liable for damages unless it's wanton and deliberate. Aval Bishkaga Shelo B'Kavana Patur. But if I do it unintentionally, and I damage your property not on your property, so then I'm going to be exempt. That's the Shita of the Rambam, which creates a huge exemption status in many, many situations, right? Now, so fine, right? So I'm, the two of us are at a stadium, at a ball game, or at some other kind of social event, and I am so excited that my team is winning that I go, yeah, and I cheer and I knock over your beer. Or even worse, I knock over your phone and it falls and it cracks, right? So am I liable for damages? It wasn't intentional. Sorry, man. Sorry, dude. Just got caught up in the game. So according to the Rambam, you're going to be putter because it wasn't done intentionally and it's in a public thoroughfare. Right? Beshitas Rashi, the Bishnehem Birishus, Kagon Birishus Arabim Oshalo Birishus. But Rashi disagrees. Rashi is of the opinion that if it's in a public area where both of us have permission to be there, or it's in a completely private area where neither of us have permission to be, afilu hizik shelo b'kavana chayav in hizik biyadayim. So then in that situation, I will be liable if I cause damage, even unintentionally, as long as it was done directly from my person to that person's property. V'imhuzak memela patur. But if it was an indirect kind of damage, where let's say I neglected to do something and through my neglect, damage was caused, let's say I didn't remove an impediment and that caused your animal to hurt itself or something, who knows, other kinds of passive things which cause damage. So then I will be patur. Uverishus hanizik la'olam chayav, uverishus hamazik la'olam patur. And then Rashi says, where he does agree with the Rambam, that if I damage your property on your property, then I'm always going to be liable. And if I damage your property on my property, then I'm always going to be patur. Uhu delo yada shehu sham. But that's only provided that if I damage your property on my property, I'm going to be patur, as if I wasn't aware that you are present. But if I am aware that you're on my property and I grant you rights of passage, I grant you rights of being on my property, so then it's no different, according to Rashi, from being in a public area where both of us have permission to be there because you granted me permission to be on your property. And therefore, in most situations, according to Rashi, when I cause damage to someone's property, in most scenarios, I'm going to be chayiv as long as it was a direct infliction of damage, right? Where I get up and I cheer in the stadium, I knock over your beer, I break your phone, right? So according to Rashi, I'm going to be chayiv. According to the Rambam, I'm going to be patur. U'l'shitas harambam desvirle dehamazik chaver berachov bebeis hamedrash v'chol makom sheish rishus l'shnei melelech. So it turns out that according to the Rambam, if I damage your property on the street in the base medrash, okay, I gave a stadium, he gives the base medrash, v'chol makom sheish rishus l'shnei melelech, or any other place where both of us have rights of passage. The kol shekain beveso shel hamazik, and certainly if I didn't damage your property on my property, so patur l'shalem imasa zo shelo b'kavana. So according to the Rambam, in all of those cases, you'll be patur if you're the damager, as long as it was done unintentionally. Yotze sherov rubam shel hezekim peturim l'shalem l'daita. So it turns out that there's a preponderance of cases that, according to the Rambam, you're going to be patur. So this is a huge, this is really, really halacha l'maisa, a huge machlokas between the Rambam and Rashi when you consider all of the permutations of how damage occurs, usually, people's stuff gets damaged when it's not on their property. Usually, we carry a camera around, you carry, a phone, other kinds of electronics. I'm walking along in the street and someone spills paint on me, right? So it's a public thoroughfare. According to the Rambam, I'm going to be patur as long as it was by accident. So, right, this really has huge ramifications. The Chazon Ish Kasav, he says, well, he says, as far as how we paskin halacha lemaisa, it's not so clear. The Chazon Ish Kasav, the Gamla HaRambam ein liftor eladavka hecha shaloshina miminhago shel olam elaholach lefi darka. And the Chazon Ish wants to sort of qualify the Rambam a little bit. And he writes that the only time that the Rambam will exempt a damager when he does it in a public area is only when he has not departed from normative behavior, right? If you haven't departed from normative behavior, but you're just walking around doing your own business and just behaving in a normal way. But if you did something that presented a potential hazard, right? Let's say you went up on a rooftop and a gust of wind blows you off, right? Or blows off your property and that property damages someone. So let's say I'm a painter and I'm on a scaffold and it's in a public area on the street. And all of a sudden, a bird comes and knocks off my paint can and it pours over somebody's suit. So even the Rambam would agree that in that situation, I'm going to be chayav. Why? Because since I'm doing something that's non-normative, that's not normally done in the public thoroughfare, and presents a potential hazard to the public, so then according to the Chazon Ish's interpretation of the Rambam, I'm going to be chayav in that case as well. It's only if, let's say, I was walking normally, and all of a sudden, I trip, and by tripping, I fall on you and I cause you to fall, and then you end up injuring yourself or injuring your property. So that's when the Rambam would say that I'm patur, because it was completely by accident and I wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. But if I'm engaged in a kind of activity which has the potential to present a hazard to the public, so then the Rambam would agree that I'm going to be chayiv in that case. Ayin sham b'tzarachin b'chol zeh. And basically, he says, I refer you to the Chazon Ish, but we would still need further analysis to really break this down further and to really know how to paskin according to the halacha. So there's a huge gray area here, which we're going to just leave unresolved, at least for now. And he says, we will be revisiting this as we get later on in this chapter, but it sounds, at least at this point, that he's basically saying this is a big gray area as to whether a person halachically is liable when he causes damage in a public area where his behavior was completely normative for that setting. Okay? I hope that's clear. Okay, then just last...
But don't we say, like, if you damage someone dancing at a wedding or something like that, then you're completely patur? Like, is there some aspect of that in this?
I believe there could be, but again, even in the Chazon Ish's definition, you have to be doing some kind of dancing that's normative. What would happen if you, and that goes back to our guy in the stadium who's like so enthusiastic and he knocks over everybody's beer, right? Is that considered normative behavior or not? I'm not so sure what you would say normative is in that kind of setting. What if a guy is so fervent in his dancing that he becomes completely, you and I have probably experienced those kinds of dancers.
Indeed. I stand back, but yes.
Yeah, some of these guys are really wild men, and no one really, I don't think anyone appreciates it except they get lost in the moment. What if a guy decides he's going to light his hat on fire? Those guys who play with pyrotechnics. And they put lighter fluid on their hat and they ignite it on fire. And all of a sudden, he loses control of the fire and he ends up igniting somebody else's hat, okay? Or someone else's who knows what, right? So in that kind of scenario, I think that the Chazon Ish's principle would prevail. Is that this is not normative behavior. This is risk-taking behavior, which of course it's acceptable risk. I mean, I'm not going to run away from the guy. If I see a guy lighting his hat on fire, I assume he knows what he's doing. I may want to stay a couple of feet away, but I'm not going to run out of the room.
Socially distanced.
I'll be socially distanced. Right. So in that kind of situation, I think that based on the Chazon Ish's interpretation, the Rambam would also agree that you have. According to Rashi, you would certainly be chayav, but according to the Rambam, you'd also be chayav in that scenario. Okay, let's hold it for today because I got to get ready for my next year, and we'll see you, Mirza Shem, at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Okay, have a great